back to my channel. It's Autism Acceptance Week this week, but to be honest, I really do not know how that is helping people like me. Like, in terms of me getting the support I need and all those other things and cuts to social services and all of that stuff, what is Autism Acceptance actually doing? I'll get onto that. But anyway, one article I came across recently, which will shock those of us like me who are highly critical of the neurodiversity movement, and it's what's the word? Can't think of the word today. Pseudo something or other. It's gone from my head. Anyway, I came across an article. It's a very recent article, saying that autistic people should be able to diagnose themselves in some cases just like gender or race. Recent documentaries by autistic BBC wildlife presenter Chris Packham and openness from high-profile celebrities with autism like billionaire Elon Musk and TV personality Melanie Sykes have increased awareness, with many people suspecting they have autistic traits like an intense interest in certain hobbies. Now, this is where what I think I would call negative autism awareness. So yeah, you have these really successful celebrities that do not represent autistic experience for most people, becoming the face of autism. And then people see these highly successful celebrities who just have, like, traits of autism, maybe. I would even hesitate as to whether I call it autism, but yeah, traits, shall we say. And people see these highly successful celebrities gracing the screens, and they think, oh, I'm a bit like that. And so yeah, that you get that, and it's like concept creep, like I was talking about in the previous video. And people lose sight of the fact that actually autism should always be seen as a clinically significant impairing condition, disorder. It's not just a collection of quirky traits, you know. This has to seriously hamper your life. But because now of concept creep, you're getting lots of highly successful celebrities who don't have any impairment in functioning now getting diagnosed. People start to see that as what autism is, and traits like an intense interest in certain hobbies. Yeah, if you're like autistic to the max, like as an actual impairing condition, it's not just intense interest or hobbies. These like take over your whole life, but that's another topic. It's not just a hobby, but lots of people are like, oh, I do a bit of collecting, or I have intense interests, and they start to see themselves as autistic when they're not even impaired. That's what I call negative awareness raising. Now, a leading expert, Professor Sue Fletcher Watson, says people should not always have to wait for medical confirmation. Speaking after a conference on neurodiversity called It Takes All Kinds of Minds, Professor Watson from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, UK, said, people often self-identify as autistic, just as they self-identify their gender or ethnicity. Doctors can sometimes get it wrong due to outdated and narrow tests for the condition, so people should be able to self-diagnose. Well, you know my views on this, obviously. I've talked about it before. I'm very against self-diagnosis. I think it is wrong on so many levels. And no, autism is not like gender or race. Autism is a disability. It would be just as wrong for someone to diagnose a serious heart condition in themselves without going to the doctor. It would be just as wrong for someone to diagnose themselves with multiple sclerosis or any other medical condition, diabetes. Now, obviously, autism is not like autism is not like a disease like diabetes, and it's not degenerative like multiple sclerosis. Autism is a lifelong condition that is not, it's a different thing, obviously. But I'm just saying that you wouldn't diagnose yourself with any serious condition like that. If you can think of a better analogy, let me know. Would you diagnose yourself with schizophrenia? No, you wouldn't. Obviously, schizophrenia is a mental illness, autism isn't, but the analogy is a little bit closer because both obviously are affecting the brain. And schizophrenia is actually one of these conditions that tends to be lifelong, a bit like autism. So, we call schizophrenia a mental illness, we call autism a neurodevelopmental disorder. Some psychiatrists, by the way, are actually now saying that schizophrenia should also be seen as a neurodevelopmental disorder, because although schizophrenia, unlike autism, tends to first occur in teenage years, or typically like young adulthood, is when people who are going to develop schizophrenia tend to develop it, although obviously people can develop it at any age. There's even childhood schizophrenia, and it is possible to develop it later in life, but I think usually people develop it sort of around, I think that, I'm going a bit off on a bit of a tangent, but I think usually, isn't it, people develop it like around their late teens, early 20s, whereas schizophrenia, whereas in autism obviously develops in babyhood and early childhood, you're kind of born with it. But yeah, I have read that some psychiatrists actually argue that schizophrenia should be seen as a neurodevelopmental condition. It's just that the symptoms don't become apparent until later on, but like your brain is already essentially schizophrenic even before the traits develop, if that makes sense. So we call schizophrenia a mental illness and we call autism a neurodevelopmental condition, but really these are just sort of like psychiatric conceits or ways of talking. In terms of actual brain, they're both brain-based conditions. Would you self-diagnose yourself with schizophrenia? No, you wouldn't. It's a lifelong condition. Often when, schizophrenia is highly unlikely to be cured, it's managed by medication, usually. I'm not an expert on schizophrenia, but I do know that it's one of those conditions that tends to be lifelong. The person is always going to have flare-ups, as it were. They have to sort of manage it and live with it. It's a serious condition, and autism is a serious condition. You don't self-diagnose schizophrenia, you don't self-diagnose autism. So it's not like gender and it's not like race. They're completely different things. You don't go to a doctor to diagnose your gender, and you don't go to a doctor to diagnose your race. They're just like benign, natural variations, not the same thing. So I don't know why anyone would see them as similar. It's absolutely absurd, but the neurodiversity movement does come out with rather absurd things, doesn't it? As we know. So that was the first thing I just wanted to say. Yes, there are some, I don't know how common this view is, it may well just be a maverick view. But then again, going by what I've seen on social media and other platforms, a lot of people in the neurodiversity movement do see self-diagnosis as valid. No, it's not valid. If you think you're autistic, for heaven's sake, go to the doctor and get yourself on a waiting list. Now, yes, waiting lists are really, really long. Now, that's another issue that I think is really out of order, and that brings me on to some other thing that's been in the news lately, which is very deeply concerning. Now, this pertains to children, and in the south, I think it's mainly in the southwest of the UK, but it might be in other areas as well. So I think in Bristol, around Bristol area, in parts of Gloucestershire, some integrated care boards in the southwest of the UK are changing the criteria for who can get on a waiting list for an autism assessment. This pertains to children. I'm not sure if this is happening for adults as well. But they're being very strict about it in certain parts of the UK. So where you can only get on a waiting list for autism assessment if you are school refusing, so like say, not attending school, if there's a risk of family breakdown, if a child is like suicidal, or if a child has extremely limited communication ability and things like that. So many children are just being shunted off the list. Now, this is really out of order. Yes, there are really long waiting lists in the country, are now oversubscribed. Lots more children are coming, parents are putting their children on the waiting list for autism. assessments. I think a lot of this is because obviously there is greater awareness now of autism. And I think also since they got rid of Asperger's, by the way, a lot of these kids will previously have been diagnosed with Asperger's as well, which is another reason why they shouldn't have got rid of the category Asperger's, just because, you know, it's now all under generic ASC, but obviously there are different conditions. But yeah, it's just wrong in so many different levels. The system is underfunded. That's the issue here. It needs more funding. And the answer is not to shunt people off the waiting list, because you're just shoring up problems for future. And I think part of the reason why I find this particularly upsetting is, yeah, this no longer obviously affects me. I'm an adult now, I'm past that. But I could have been that child. I was that child. I had many problems when I was at school. I've talked about this elsewhere. I was assessed by Educational Psychology, Paediatric Occupation Service when I was 9, 10 years old. It identified very severe problems, and it recommended that the school, support me in all these different areas, and I got the bare minimum of support. And I didn't get diagnosed autistic until I was 21. I should have got diagnosed a lot earlier because all the signs were there, but I've talked about this elsewhere in my other videos, so I won't go into that now. But what I'm trying to say is that because I was a happy child, I wasn't depressed, I wasn't suicidal, I attended school perfectly fine, I didn't truant, I didn't school refuse, it caused a lot of problems at home, there was a lot of stress and a lot of arguments, but, family held itself together. Yeah, and I was developing mental health below the surface, anxiety disorder was getting worse and worse until eventually it became really very extreme, until we're at this point where I can't even properly leave the house apart from to go for a brief walk every day. And I mean, obviously we didn't anticipate a pandemic, but, my OCD got a lot worse in my teen years. If I'd received that help at the age of 9, 10, that could have prevented that. Maybe, just maybe, I would be able to work as an adult. Who knows? It's possible, but I don't think I would be quite as disabled as I am now if I'd received the support I needed when I was 9 and 10. But I didn't, and maybe I should have just created a bit more problems. Maybe then I would have got that support. But like what I'm trying to say is that many children will be like me. And some of them will not be getting that support they need just because they're bumbling along, not creating a massive fuss. Maybe they're lucky enough not to be depressed, but getting support shouldn't rely upon whether or not you're depressed or not. Maybe they're going along to school. They might be extremely stressed, but kind of like holding it all in and stuff. And their problems are just going to escalate and get worse and worse and worse. And and people deserve to know what is going on with themselves. Not to have that really affects your self-concept, particularly as a teenager. It's your self-esteem. Because, if you can't make friends and you don't know how to relate to other people and you don't know why you can't relate to other people, that really affects your self-esteem. And it is not right that these children are being shunted off a list. And that makes me very angry. And it is Tory right-wing cuts. That's what it comes down to. It's absolutely disgusting. It was in the 1990s. We had a Tory government back then. We've got a Tory government now. And it's the same old crap. Although New Labour didn't really change things much either, but because they were effectively Tories as well, but not as bad as the actual Tories, but but yeah, it's the same old crap, isn't it? Like, the system just is not being funded enough, and it is just really, really wrong. But self-diagnosis is not the answer. That is wrong too. But I just think they need to pump a lot more funding into the system, and then people can get the assessment they deserve, and they can find out, if they're autistic or if it's something else or whatever, but they should be able to get the right diagnosis and get the support they need. Anyway, rant over. So moving over to video number 2 now.